All right, we're in the fourth week of our series on the life of David, and I want to begin the message today by asking you to dream with me a little bit, but will you do it as you stay awake, all right? What do you want? Now, don't answer out loud. I want you to think about this. What do you want? A year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? What is it that the Lord has put in your heart that He's communicating to you? I'm going to do this with your life. What do you want? 25 years ago in a graduate school class, I was tasked with writing some life goals. After several weeks of thinking and talking to my wife about that, three things from the standpoint of career have not changed in those 25 intervening years. I want to pastor a church. It's a high privilege. I love caring for and extending God's reach to people. Secondly, I want to plant a church. Check, done 16 years ago. We're celebrating in October our 16th year as a church. And then the third thing is write a book. So stay tuned. Once I get the first two done, maybe I can give some attention to that third thing. But it's very clear to me these are the goals God's put in my heart. Question for us, what is it you want? The more clearly you answer that question, the more likely you are to achieve that. And here's what the thesis of our entire series on the life of David has been and will be. We're going to have to fight some battles to accomplish the things in life God has called us to accomplish. Once you've identified what are those things, they are not going to fall into your lap. He's stirred in your heart. These are the things I want. Listen. Do you want to have a disciplined life that is filled with intimacy with God? You're going to fight for that. If you're a single person, do you want to live your singleness in a way that honors God? Do you want to be effective for Him in your current setting? That's going to require us to fight for it. If, like me, you're married, do you want the kind of marriage that brings great joy and the kind of marriage where you, as one of the partners in the marriage, add value to the marriage? Listen, newsflash to exactly no one, we're going to have to fight for that. Do you want children who are disciplined and love the Lord and respectful and will pass along to your grandchildren that same faith? Man, you're going to have to fight fiercely for that. Do you want to achieve on your job? Do you want to get ahead financially? Do you want to have a house that you can live in and call your own? Every one of those things requires that we fight. We must fight battles if we will accomplish the things that God has called us to accomplish in life. Take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 18. One thing has been clearly communicated to David, the young man we met 4 weeks ago. He's just a shepherd, and shattering the complacency of his life, God sends His great prophet Samuel, and Samuel says to David, one day you'll be king. That's a pretty good day. In other words, what God communicated to David is, here's what the Lord will do with your life. How powerful it is when we recognize that in our own lives. But listen. You're going to be king. And David will have to fight for every single advance. In fact, when we get to 1 Samuel chapter 18, it looks like this is going to be the fast track to promotion and kingship. Everything is going swimmingly for David. Look at chapter 18, verses 1 through 7. David, as in the aftermath of killing Goliath the giant, he's on a rocket ride to success. 18:1. As soon as David had finished speaking with Saul is the king. Ultimately, he's the king that David will replace. And as soon as David finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan is is Saul's firstborn. He's a very effective military leader, and he will become David's best friend. And here's how that happened. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, took David that day, and he would not let him return to his father's house. So David had been shuttling back and forth, right? He's a commuter, and I'm going to work for the king, but I'm going to be able to go home at night, and can't do that anymore. He's going to stay here. Look at verse 3. Jonathan made a covenant with David. That's important. That's going to drive the narrative forward over the next 7, 8, 9 chapters. There are some promises that are made between the house of Saul through Jonathan, the crown prince, and the house of David, led by David himself. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul, and Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him. So there's something about the royal authority Jonathan has that he's willing to share with David, and he gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And look at verse 5. And David went out, and he was, what's the word? What's the word? David went out, and he was. That word will be used 4 times in this chapter of David. In fact, Bible scholars, a little note, that word is used of David more often than any other person in the entire Old Testament. You want to summarize the life of David from the perspective of the biblical writers. He was a success. And wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul sent him out over the men, set him over the men of war. And so Saul's sort of closest personal guard, David is now the chief. He's the captain of that. He gets the corner office. He's promoted. And look at the end of verse 5. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So yeah, promotion. Everybody's like, oh, that totally makes sense. We like that. Look at verses 6 and 7. And as they were coming home, in other words, after the battle in Goliath, and then they pursue the enemies, and they recapture their own home territory, and this is good, and the men of war are returning, and their wives come out to welcome them back and celebrate. It's a victory parade, and the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and songs of joy and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated Saul. And it's very poetic in the original, 5 syllables. Saul has struck down his thousands. And the next line, 5 more syllables. And David his 10,000s. Here's what's happening in these verses in the life of David. He has powerful friends. Okay, you're befriended by the crown prince. That's important. He has access. David, you're going to be right here in the throne room. He's close to the centers of power in his country, and he has status. Here, take my uniform. Here, take my sword. Here, take my belt. And you ever notice how that status, a little bit of that goes a long way, and it's like really... sometimes it just really causes people problem, right? You ever see the movie Paul Blart Mall Cop? Right? You give the guy a uniform, and all of a sudden Kevin James is like CIA, right? Or let me give you an example that we've all dealt with, right? You ever been to the license branch? Anybody here work for the license branch? So let me clarify before I go the rest of the story, right? Okay, and if you do, you are the exception to the rule for sure. So you go to the license branch, and you have these roped off things, and then there's like a piece of tape on the floor, and it's like, do not cross. It's like, right? And if you do, I've had this happen to me out in Lombard. If you do that, there's some lady behind a counter with a lanyard and a ton of authority saying, sir, yes. And then you walk up to the window. I don't know about you. I tried to fight it when I first came to Chicago, and it is totally a losing battle. So the strategy for me now is totally, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Oh, wonderful, ma'am. And sometimes, I'm not saying this is the case, sometimes it feels like their whole goal in life is let me fail you and make you come back with another set of documents. And a little bit of status goes a long way, right? And so David has this now. He has access, he has power and status, and he has promotion. Not only do you kill a giant, but then you're given the charge of sort of the personal guard for the king. And not only do you do that well, but now we're going to send you out on a few of these battles, and he wins every one. And all of a sudden he's set over a group of 1,000. That's 1,000 employees he manages. Pretty good for a kid. And then verses 6 and 7, they're singing about him. It's fame. He gets to be popular. In fact, let's trace this theme through chapter 18. Look at verse 5. I have a circle in my Bible. David went out and was, what's the word? Successful. Look down at verse 14, 15. And David had, say it with me, success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that David had great, what's the word? Success, he stood in fearful awe of him. And so there's a little bit like, oh, hey, what's going on with this guy? And then the next verse, verse 16, all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. There's a public presence of great success. And then look at verse 30, it's sort of the exclamation point in this entire chapter. The princes of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more, what did he have? He had more success than all of the servants of Saul, so that, who doesn't want this? His name was highly esteemed. And so where we find ourselves, maybe a few months, perhaps a few years after David's triumph over the giant, is on a rocket ship to success. Promotion and access and wealth and power and all that comes with it, all because the Lord is with him and God has promised him he will be king, and he is on the fast track to that. Here, in fact, is what we find. David had success. Success brought him promotion, and promotion brought him, what am I going to say next? Promotion brought him trouble, problems, heartbreak, tragedy. If you and I are going to accomplish the things in life God has called us to accomplish, we're going to have to fight some battles. And when you fight and win some battles, what happens is you get promoted. And if you think that promotion makes your life easier, let's look from the life of David at how miserable promotion made David's life. Now let's mark this. Every step of the way, David is exactly in the center of God's will. But in David's life, promotion will bring him turmoil and heartbreak and hurt and even loss. So what's going to happen is the next 10 years of David's life will be marked by these three things. The 10 years of hardship and loneliness and pursuit and heartbreak will sharpen every skill that David has. He will learn more in the next 10 years than he will in the succeeding 60 years of his life. Not only will it sharpen his skills, but these 10 years of turmoil in David's life will strengthen his soul. He will come out of this season of promotion followed by suffering as a man who has a very tender heart toward God, but a deep, deep strength, a well of power in his very soul. And the third thing is what I want to look at today. Success brought promotion, promotion brought trouble. And in this case, chapters 18 and 19 of 1 Samuel, that trouble is expressed in strain in every personal relationship that he has. He has a bad boss, he has a good friend, and he has a troubled marriage. From chapter 18, let's see if we can't trace this out. It begins with trouble at work. David is promoted, success, promotion. That pattern is repeated over an abbreviated time. So months, maybe years. David's still a young man when this is all happening, and that begins to cast a shadow. Okay, remember, promotion brings problems. You're ready to take the next step in your career, expect some problems. You're a single person and you say, the solution to my problems in life is I need to get married. And all married people are like, yeah, really? Some of us are thinking, yeah, singleness wasn't so bad. And you're married and you're saying, well, it's okay, but really if we had kids, that would make life so much better. Especially once they're teenagers. And And if I could just get that next promotion on my job, life's going to be so good, and I'll accomplish that thing God's calling me to accomplish. Listen, I hope you do that. In fact, I hope you surpass whatever your dreams are, but mark it down. Your promotion is going to bring another set of problems. And you're going to have to be prepared to fight to accomplish the things in life God's called you to accomplish. So the problems for David begin on the job. Verse 8. 1 Samuel 18, Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. Oh, I see, David has 10,000. I only get 1,000. Look at the end of look at verse 9. Saul kept an eye on David from that day on. Okay, so it's some problems here. And verse 10, this is a pretty direct challenge, I think, to David. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul. He raved within his house. Don't say anything about your boss raving. I get it. And so, and a harmful spirit was on him, and David was playing the lyre as he did day by day, and Saul had his spear in his hand. Listen, look at verse 11. And Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. I don't know what kind of difficult meeting you had with your boss last week, but likely it didn't involve a spear chucked at you, right? But what's interesting to me is the very last word of that verse. What's it say? He hurled the spear at David. What's the word? What's it say? Twice. Really? Like once wasn't enough? You didn't leave the meeting the first time the shaft got pinned into the wall behind you? Oh, maybe he didn't really mean it. I mean... What happens next is conspiracy. It's scheming. And Saul's going to try through the military avenue to say to David, let me give you the most difficult assignments, and hopefully he's going to lose a battle and he's going to die. And what happens is David wins the battles and he's promoted. And then the scheming gets really twisted, and this tells you something about how depraved Saul had become. Saul says, hey, why don't you marry my daughter? You know, this was very common in the ancient world where you marry into a royal family. It's sort of an alliance that ensures there's no war between the two. But the scriptures say in chapter 18 but Saul thought to do this to trap David. David's response was the natural response of a commoner. He said, I don't have the money to live a prince and princess lifestyle. I can't marry Saul's daughter. And Saul said, just go fight a battle with the Philistines and just bring me the evidence that you've killed 100 of them. It's twisted. And David wins a battle that involves 200. And again, there's success. And we get a little further on. Look at verses 20 and 21. There's the scheming. And Saul's daughter Michal loved David. They told Saul, and the thing pleased him. He thought, let me give him to her that she may be a snare for him. And before you say something snide about women being a trap for men, what he meant by that was not about Michal. What he meant was that the bride price of 100 Philistines dead would likely cost David his life. And that, none of that works. And so look at chapter 19, verse 1. Again, pretty blunt. Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants. What's this staff meeting like? Hey guys, here's the game plan for this week's. Here's the deliverable this week. And kill David. Okay, like that's on the whiteboard, right? What's okay? By Friday noon, what has to be done? Kill him. And wow. It's rough. And Jonathan, chapter 19, verse 1, Saul's son delighted much in David. And so in his relationship, you have this deterioration between Saul the king and David, his most trusted advisor and most successful employee. And the scene shifts in chapter 19 to a relationship between David and Saul's son Jonathan. Chapter 19, look at verse 2. So at this staff meeting where it's like, look, I've tried all the schemes, it's not working. You guys, let me make it clear, deliverable, kill David. Now I want you to picture the scene. Saul is an increasingly unstable, dictatorial monarch. Jonathan is the crown prince, but a good close friend of David. David, who's fled, he's no longer here in this meeting, is the topic of the meeting. Kill him. In the presence of your father, who is also your supervisor, you're going to have a difficult conversation. This is tough. And look at what Jonathan does. It's a model of godliness and integrity. Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, is seeking to kill you. Be on your guard. And so, go away, get out of here. And look at verse 4. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and he said to him, and listen to the argument Jonathan makes for why David is a friend, not a foe of the king. Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you. He's not done you any wrong, and he's in fact benefited you. He took his life in his hands and he struck down the Philistines. Like, Dad, have you forgotten the giant sprawled out on the floor of the valley of Elah? The implied rebuke is, and you weren't the one that killed him, king. The Lord worked a great salvation for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. That's pretty pointed conversation. Come on, Dad. What happened to the joy I saw in you a few months ago? Why then will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? That's pretty direct. Question for us. Are we the kind of man or woman like Jonathan that stands by our friends even when they're not there to hear the criticism? That's a powerful thing in life. And when the issue gets raised, and clearly in this case it was false information, can we say, hey, wait a minute. And all Jonathan did was recount the facts and help Saul see. And don't you remember how you felt about that? Will you be that kind of a woman or that kind of a man for your friends? Look at the powerful effect it has. Verse 6, and Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. You can have that influence on people too. Saul swore, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And I love this. This is such a powerful moment in this whole narrative. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported him all these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. I love peacemakers, right? And the Lord said, blessed are those who are the peacemakers. But this was a short-lived reprieve. We get chapter 19, verse 11, and the scene shifts from Saul to Jonathan, and now from Jonathan to Saul's daughter Michal, who by this point is married to David. And verse 11, Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. Okay, well, clearly Saul's attitude toward David has reverted back to that hateful jealousy. And David's young and fairly new wife, Michal, said to him, look at verse 11, chapter 19. Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. I mean, I just try and picture, I put myself, okay, the pillow talk tonight is, honey, if you don't leave right now, I know Dad, I know him, you're going to be dead. Right? And she's like, yeah, can I catch a nap first? And, well, I didn't have supper yet. And verse 12, Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. All right, just pay attention. He fled away and escaped. We're going to see that in a minute. He fled away and escaped. He didn't go out the front door of his own home. He's climbing out the back window and under the cover of darkness, sneaking away from his house and his new wife. Look at verse 13. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair at its head and covered it with cloth. This is like something out of a suspense novel, right? Put the bolsters, the pillows, and put the dark-haired, curly goat's hair pillow, make it look like he's laying there. Well, why'd she do that? Look at verse 14. Saul sent messengers to take David. Okay, so the detectives are sitting out front of the car eating donuts, waiting for the sun to rise to go arrest this guy. And at least that's how, don't you picture it that way? All right, well, and she said, verse 14, so the sun is risen, it's now the morning. She said, he's sick. He can't go with you for questioning. He's not coming to work today. He's sick. And then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in his bed that I may kill him. I don't care if he's sick. If you have to carry him here, one holding each corner of the bed, get him here. I'm not going to miss with the spear this time. And the messengers came in. Behold, the image was in the bed. And the pillow of goat's hair was what? All of a sudden, maybe it's noon this morning now, but this day, and it's like, this guy, he's long gone. And look at verse 17. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go that he has escaped? Okay, think about the relational turmoil. This is your dad talking about your husband. I'm going to kill him. And now you've lied to me as well. This, by the way, is a pattern that's going to develop in Michal, the wife's life, where she begins to lie not only about David, soon she'll lie to David. And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? Oh, well, thank you very much for that. Whereas Jonathan demonstrates a loyalty. He says, hey, Dad, stop it. You know that's not true. Michal's just saving her own skin. Like, hey, well, he threatened to kill me, which, by the way, is a capital offense. You've threatened a member of the royal family. David's on the run. In fact, you want to trace that out? Look at chapter 19, verse 18. David fled and escaped. Look at chapter 20, verse 1. Then David fled from Naioth. Look at chapter 21 and verse 10. And David rose and fled that day from Saul. And he went to Achish, the king of Gath. He went where? Gath? A Philistine city? Do you know who was from Gath? Goliath was from Gath. You've run away from your own people to go over to the enemy, David? Look at chapter 22 and verse 1. Maybe the saddest verse in David's downward spiral of these next 10 years. And David departed from there and escaped to the cave. He's living separated from his family and his wife in a cave. If you're living under the illusion that your promotion or accomplishing what God's called you to accomplish in life is going to lead to a life of ease, let David's example wake you up. The next 10 years will be the most difficult of his life. And yet God will use the next 10 years in David's life to shape him to be the king who would be the greatest in the history of Israel. Next week we're going to talk about some friendship. The week after that we're going to talk about dealing with some of the most devastating losses we'll ever deal with. But let's focus for a few minutes here. How do I navigate a painful relationship? I said that the 10 years of David's suffering and his fleeing and his running and his being a refugee will sharpen his skills, it will strengthen his soul, but it also strains his relationship. So let's talk about navigating a strained relationship. How can I do that? First of all, take your time. You want to navigate a strained relationship, take your time. It's interesting to me that Saul stuck the spear in the wall twice. That's long suffering. It's interesting to me that after escaping and fleeing, and Jonathan comes and says, hey, David, listen, I talked to Dad, we got this thing worked out. David returns. It's interesting to me that about 5 years later, when David has the opportunity to actually spear Saul, it's an interesting reversal of fortune. Saul tries to spear David. About 5 years later, David has the opportunity to spear Saul, and he passes on it. Gives him a long time. Only on silly television shows do relational problems that have lasted for a year or 10 years or 20 get solved by the end of the next commercial break. Take your time. Unwind the ball of string that's in your belly right now. Trust that there's a God in heaven who loves you, will accomplish His will in your life, and just take your time. Second, go the extra mile. David will model again and again an extreme level of patience, a tremendous amount of self-discipline, of going the extra mile. Don't turn there. Can I read to you from Romans chapter 12? I don't know where you're at relationally. I don't know if it's in the home with a child or a parent. I don't know if it's on the job. I don't know if it's maybe it's in our church. But if you find yourself, bad boss, good friend, troubled marriage, listen to these inspired words from Romans 12. Repay no one evil for evil. Give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay. Do we believe that? Can that lower our anxiety level? To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. There's a sense of embarrassment that they will face when you respond with good rather than evil. Is this not the Lord's example, by the way? Verse 21 of Romans 12, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That requires fighting fiercely. So I would, in a strained relationship, I would take your time. I would go the extra mile. Third, I would seek help. We will find in coming weeks that David goes to Jonathan for help. He goes to his wife Michal for help. He goes to Samuel the prophet for help. He goes to a priest for help. He seeks Saul's servants and say a good word for me. Sometimes these are relational things, really painful. They get really convoluted, and honestly, we don't see very clearly. And what you and I need to do is find some help outside of ourselves. Get some good counsel. This, by the way, is what pastors and elders and men and women within our church, maybe even your small group leader, they may have tremendous insight to help you. Will you risk some vulnerability and tell them the truth about that? If you find them to be trustworthy in those things, likely you'll find them to be trustworthy in these relational things. Well, let me wrap it up with 3 final words of counsel. Promotion is going to bring problems, but don't avoid promotion. You're going to purchase for yourself a whole new set of issues, and so how do I deal with that? And let me give you the 3 things. First of all, be faithful while you wait for promotion. David just kept the sheep. Boom, Goliath opportunity comes. He kills it. Did you see what I did there? He kills that opportunity, and he's promoted to be in the king's presence. And the king says, "You're in charge of my guard," and the guard gets better. And well, you're in charge of 1,000 employees, and the 1,000 employees get better. And just be faithful. Just be faithful. Right? Just be faithful. Yes, I know you want to accomplish some things in life. The way you're going to get there is not by clamoring for the promotion, but by being good at what you're doing now. I want to have a good marriage. Well, what are you contributing to the marriage? Well, why are my kids responding the right way? Well, how are you training the kids? See what I'm saying? Be faithful while you wait for promotion. Secondly, be humble when you get promotion. Charles Swindoll has always been, for me, a mentor in ministry. He's just so insightful. I was reading this week his book on the life of David, and he's commenting on how Saul is elevated to the kingship. And as David begins to thrive, Saul begins to fall into this cycle of jealousy and reprisal. And Swindoll observes jealousy is a deadly sin. And the suspicion of Saul shackled him to its prison. Because Saul operated in that tight radius of fear and worry and paranoia. Listen, this is so good. Saul's great goal in life became twisted. Instead of leading Israel into bigger and better things, he focused on making David's life miserable. Be humble in promotion. Question for us. Saul has slain his thousands. David is 10,000s. Can you celebrate the success of a subordinate? If part of your responsibility is to manage others, are you secure enough to be able to say, I am glad when they get good and the team wins together? Saul will increasingly, under the influence of paranoia and insecurity, destroy the very responsibility he has. If you have people under your care, will you make it your business to see that they thrive and that they hear from you what a great job they're doing? Can you celebrate spouses and parents and children when somebody else does well? Be faithful while you wait for promotion. Be humble when you get promotion. Third, be careful after you've received promotion. Be careful. You have opened up for yourselves a lot of potential problems. The livelihood, the emotional and spiritual health of others depends on how you handle things. One of the things I say to our pastoral staff, I mentioned it to our elders on a retreat this last week, is that as you have the responsibility for others as promotion comes along, our words are heavy. Weigh them very carefully. Maintain a humility as we climb the ladder in life. Again, Swindoll. No matter how fast the promotion, how high the elevation may be, we are never to lose our teachability. We never reach a level where we are above criticism or we no longer need the input of others. Hard sentence to close this paragraph, but I think it's true. Frankly, there are times when our best lessons can be learned from our enemies. Let me invite the worship team to come back up here and lead our closing song. Let me close this message this way, because there's some challenging stuff here. The life of David's going to hit us right where we live. One of the things I want to do is time and time again connect what's going on in David's life with the songs that he wrote. Out of the joy of promotion and the crushing heartbreak of that promotion leading to trouble and problems and relational strain, David wrote a song that really is a prayer. It expresses a deep trust in God, and it's pretty specific about praying for what happens to his enemies. Will you just listen to the Word of God as composed by David, the songwriter of Israel, about this issue of promotion and the problems that comes with that. Psalm 25 is where I'm reading. To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in you I trust. Let me not be put to shame. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Indeed, none who wait for you shall be put to shame. They shall be ashamed who are treacherous. You think he's thinking about with Saul in that case. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me into your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all day long. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. The troubles of my heart are enlarged. Bring me out of my distress. Consider my affliction and my trouble, and forgive all my sins. Consider how many are my foes, and with what violent hatred they hate me. Oh, guard my soul and deliver me. Let me not be put to shame, for, Lord, I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness preserve me while I wait for you. Father, thank you for David's example, powerful example. Thank you, Father, for the clear calling you put in David's life. You will be king. And nothing about promotion, nothing about fleeing would change that. So God, I pray today for men and women who are perfectly clear on what it is God's called them to do. God, give us the strength to endure both promotion and setback, victory and defeat. God, may we never play the victim. May we never become embittered. With David, may we simply trust that you are with us during this time. Father, I pray for men and women here who don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. He is the Lord. He is the Savior. He makes us right. He's the one that forgives sins. God, that we would trust Him with our very lives and souls. God, for those right here with really strained relationships, grant them strength and hope, trust, and patience, I pray. We ask this in the name of Jesus, our Savior, and all God's people agreed by saying,